Most people don't realize it, but there is a quiet, almost unseen behavior that controls a large part of modern human relationships, the urge to explain yourself all the time. It is a habit that seems harmless, even polite. After all, justifying your choices, your feelings, your absences, or mood swings can sound like caring, like thought for others. But behind this constant need to justify yourself lies something much deeper and more troubling, a poorly healed mental wound. Carl Gustav Jung, one of the most important figures in psychology, identified this pattern as a clear sign of being disconnected from your true self. For him, the repeated attempt to convince others about who you are, what you feel, and why you act in a certain way actually shows a state of ignoring your own needs. The person who constantly explains themselves is often looking for something they never got permission to exist. This behavior often starts in settings marked by emotional dismissal. These are situations, often in families, where a child's personal experience is regularly rejected. That's nonsense. You're exaggerating. There's no reason to feel that way. The message taken to heart is harsh. What I feel only matters if others get it, approve, or allow it. Over time, this belief turns into an invisible cage where the person becomes reliant on others' understanding to confirm their own inner world. When an adult feels forced to explain themselves, they are unconsciously trying to escape abandonment, criticism, or rejection. They believe that if others understand their reasons, maybe they won't blame them, won't pull away, won't cast them out. It is a desperate try to manage how others see them, to guarantee belonging and emotional safety. But this constant struggle comes at a very high cost, their own mental freedom. By focusing on outside approval, the person starts to neglect their own inner voice. They no longer act because they believe in something, but because they need to justify themselves to avoid being misinterpreted. They no longer feel openly but overthink their emotions to avoid the unease of being seen in a bad light. Slowly, they stop living for themselves and start performing for others in a never-ending play where the audience has more power than the main character. Jung saw this phenomenon as a major block on the path to becoming yourself, the process by which a person truly becomes who they are. And the truth is tough. As long as there is a constant need to explain yourself, there is no inner liberty, because compulsive explanation is a clever form of giving in. It is as if, with each reason given, the person says, "I can only exist if you say I can." This video is an offer to break down this conditioning, a close look at why so many people live stuck in the need to justify themselves, and what happens when they finally choose quiet. When they decide to stop explaining themselves, something shifts completely. The mind, previously bent by outside approval, begins to stand up with a new stance, that of inner authority. And this changes everything. Behind the need to explain yourself, there is something much deeper than good manners or the wish to be understood. It is a psychic wound buried at the heart of who you are. Jung understood that this drive for self-explanation is not just a behavior pattern, it is a sign, a reflection of something much older, the unconscious belief that your life only has worth when confirmed by others. This wound forms early, often in childhood, in environments where the child's own perspective is constantly undermined. When a child shows sadness and is told they are being dramatic, when they show anger and are called difficult or rude, when they show fear and get scorn or mockery in return, they start to take in a dangerous message: what I feel is wrong. I can only trust what others say. Over time, the child develops a protective habit, trying to be understood to feel safe. They learn that if they explain well what they feel, they might not be punished, ignored, or laughed at. And so a pattern is created that will be carried into adulthood, justifying every feeling, every choice, every action, as if a good argument was needed to have the right to feel and to be. At the base of this wound is the loss of inner authority. The person no longer sees themselves as someone whose life is valid on its own. They come to rely on the outside view to confirm whether their experiences are acceptable or not. This creates a mental state of surrender, where self-worth is not built from the inside, but from the image in the eyes of others. It is important to see that this pattern does not happen on purpose. Often those stuck in this cycle don't even see that they are always trying to persuade others that their feelings are fair, that their choices make sense, that their actions have a cause, but behind every explanation there is a hidden fear, the fear of being cast out for simply being yourself. Jung claimed that every person needs, at some point in life, to face this inherited inner framework. Until they do, they keep working by the values, opinions, and hopes of others, often taken in from authority figures in childhood, like parents, teachers, or religious leaders. The person becomes a copy of what others would like, not of who they really are. This compulsive self-explanation, therefore, is a form of self-denial. It is the act of turning away from your own truth to make it easier for others to take. And it is exactly at this point that the healing process begins, seeing that you no longer need to ask for permission to live, that your emotions, no matter how strong, mixed, or odd they may seem, do not need to be explained to deserve room. But this awakening does not happen without hurt. When the person starts to stay quiet against the need to justify, the silence that appears is confusing because it shows the empty space left by the lack of a strong inner authority. And it is exactly about this that Jung talks when introducing one of the main ideas of his psychology, the building of inner authority. In the next part, we will look at how this idea, central to the Jungian process of self-realization, can completely change the way someone places themselves in the world. What does it mean to develop inner authority, and why is this the key to breaking the cycle of self-explanation? If this content makes sense to you, click the subscribe button and join the channel. Thank you for your support. Compulsive self-explanation is not just a protective strategy, it is a continuing act of self-betrayal, a quiet betrayal, often unnoticed, but deeply damaging. Carl Jung saw that every time a person changes their words to avoid upsetting, hides their feelings to keep peace, or holds back their choices to avoid judgment, they are moving away from themselves. They are in fact leaving their own truth behind. This inner betrayal does not happen loudly, like a sudden split with the self. Instead, it is slow, subtle, day by day. It happens when you laugh at something you don't find amusing to seem friendly, when you say yes but mean no to avoid looking selfish, when you explain your sadness as weariness because you don't want to be a problem, when you feel anger but cover it as logic, afraid to seem childish. With each small agreement made for the sake of fitting in, a piece of the spirit is left behind. Jung pointed out that this kind of behavior is a direct result of the ego, cut off from the self. The ego, which should just be the practical center of awareness, becomes a slave to outside acceptance. It changes itself to become what others wish to see. And in this endless adjusting, the person loses contact with themselves. They stop hearing their own gut feeling, distrust their own emotions, and doubt their most genuine reasons. Uncertainty takes the place of inner trust. This process of self-denial is sneaky because it is praised by society. People who fit in well, who know how to explain themselves, who steer clear of fights, who are easy to be with, are often complimented. But behind this surface peace often lies a deep emotional tiredness, a tiredness of those who live for others but can no longer listen to themselves. Jung stated that this kind of inner breaking apart is one of the main reasons for anxiety disorders. When the ego moves too far from the self, the symbolic center of mental completeness, signs appear: constant worry, crises about life's meaning, feelings of hollowness, trouble choosing, poor self-image. And why? Because the spirit is shouting to be heard, but has been quieted for the sake of fitting in. At the core, what is being risked here is a vital question: whose life is it? As long as you are always looking for approval to feel, think, or act, your life will be just an act, a cleaned-up version of your truth. You will always be a player in someone else's story, never the writer of your own. The only way to break this cycle of self-betrayal is to take back inner authority. It is to build the ability to stand by your truth, even when it is not understood, even when it causes trouble, even when it goes against hopes. This is the start of true self-realization, becoming complete, even if it means letting others down. But how to grow this inner authority? How to stop leaning on outside understanding to confirm who you are? How to keep quiet when faced with pressure for reasons. This is exactly what Jung suggests with his idea of individuation, and this is what we will look into deeply in the next part, because only when this authority exists does silence stop being emptiness and becomes a statement. For Carl Jung, real mental freedom does not come from social approval or outside understanding. It grows from the development of inner authority. This idea, central to his theory of becoming yourself, means the person's power to confirm their own personal experience without depending on the okay from others. It is the moment when you stop wondering, will they get what I feel, and start stating, it doesn't matter if they get it, this is real for me. Inner authority is the opposite of compulsive self-explanation. While the latter is rooted in doubt and the need to explain every move to be accepted, inner authority comes from the strong belief that your truth does not need to be bargained, and this change is not just in the mind, it is in your being. It is a shift of focus. The center of the mind moves. It goes from the edge of outside approval back to the core of the self, where your whole being lives. But this change is not easy. It requires bravery, because by stopping to explain yourself, the person directly faces the fear of being left, the fear of criticism, the fear of being left out. Jung said that individuation requires crossing the wilderness of inner loneliness, the moment when for the first time you hold a no without shame, when you do not explain yourself for changing your opinion, when you finish a talk without saying why, not from pride but simply because you owe no one anything to be. Growing this authority does not mean becoming cold or shut off to talk. On the contrary, it means that you no longer need to plead for understanding. You give your truth as an offering, not as a request for acceptance. Talk stops being a show and becomes a real sharing. It is the difference between speaking to be liked and speaking to be real. In practice, inner authority shows in small everyday actions, in quiet when faced with a challenge, in the steadiness of saying that doesn't feel right to me, without needing to say why, in the refusal to join an emotional game, where you always have to explain your stand, and most of all in the power to bear the unease of not being understood, and still stay whole. Jung believed that this is one of the most key moments of the mental path, the instant when the person stops getting their self-worth from outside and starts to see it as something that comes from within. This change is meaningful and strong, as it marks the break with the old trained self, the one that lives to please, and the start of a new self, grounded, independent, complete. But this new attitude is not welcomed by all. On the contrary, the quiet that comes from inner authority often upset things. People who previously gained from your doubt begin to lose their grip. Controlling people feel at risk. Relationships based on power starts to fall apart. And that is exactly why, when you stop explaining yourself, everything shifts. In the next part, we will jump into this life-changing turning point. Why does quiet hold so much power? What happens to your relationships when you say no to continuing to justify who you are? Get ready, because what comes next might totally change your view of the bonds you have today. If what you're hearing connects with you, you'll find real worth in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow explains Jung's main ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day plan to use them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. Quiet, when it comes from wholeness and not from holding back, is one of the most changing forces of the human mind. Jung knew this with stark clarity. He saw quiet not as a lack of answer, but as a show of authority. When someone stops justifying themselves out of compulsion, they are not just avoiding fights or ending chats, they are shutting down a whole system of mental control that fed on their uncertainty. This kind of quiet is disturbing, because for those who have always expected you to give in, to explain yourself, to fix yourself, the lack of explanation is seen as defiance. And in a way, it is. But not a childish defiance, the kind that yells to be heard. It is a silent uprising, an unspoken statement. I owe no reasons to be who I am. Manipulative people who thrive on others' uncertainty begin to lose. Because emotional manipulation only works when there is visible weakness, when there is fear of being misunderstood, fear of being left, fear of letting down. Manipulation needs a reaction, but the secure quiet which comes from inner authority is a stone wall. It does not answer, does not explain itself, does not play along. It just is. And this shakes any try to control. What's more, relationships that have always leaned on your surrender, emotional, thoughtful, or behavioral, start to show their true colors, weak, unbalanced, based on inequality. When you stop explaining yourself, You break the unspoken agreement of being less. You stop placing yourself as someone who needs to be accepted and start holding the space of someone who already accepts themselves, and this changes everything. Some people will pull away, and this is not a sign of a mistake, but of getting straight, because your quiet starts to work as a filter. It shows who was with you from real connection and who was only there because you were simple to manage. Jung said that the process of becoming yourself often needs breaks, and this moving away is not a penalty, it is freedom. When you stop justifying your presence, your limits, your decisions, you begin to draw relationships based on shared respect, not on fear or need. But you need to be ready, because by stopping to explain yourself, you will also have to handle your own nervousness. The part of you that learned for years that you needed to be understood to have value will fight back. It will want to return to justifying itself. It will plead with you to think again, to explain just this one time. It is at this moment that quiet becomes a spiritual practice, a mindful act of staying whole, even when facing unease. Quiet, therefore, is not just the lack of words, it is the confirmation of being. It is the refusal to put your identity on trial. And the more you hold this quiet, the more it changes into presence. A presence that gives off authority, that earns respect without shouting, that sets limits without needing a fight. A presence that does not need approval to be. But the effect of quiet goes beyond ties with others. It starts a deep process within the mind. Integration. When you stop justifying yourself, you begin to hear yourself. When you stop overthinking your emotions, you start to feel them fully. And that is where real change begins, because outside quiet opens room for inner hearing. In the next part, we will look at this key turning point, how the authority you gain in front of the world actually starts with an inner movement, the return to your own mental wholeness. You will see why whole people do not persuade, they share, and why when you take this stand, the world begins to treat you in a totally new way. There is something attractive about a person who feels no need to explain themselves, something that cannot be copied or forced. It is about mental integrity, the state of someone who no longer bargains their own core to meet outside hopes. Jung understood this integrity as one of the most grown-up signs of self-realization, when the person not only knows their truth, but stands by it without delay, without guilt, and above all without the need for outside okay. A whole person does not plead to be understood, they share, they state, but they do not try to win over, because they do not begin from the idea that they need to justify their life. Their words come from a firm center, not from a hidden need. This changes all in how they are seen. The world treats with more respect those who treat themselves with respect, and self-respect begins when you refuse to bargain what is key in you. Mental integrity does not mean stubbornness. It means consistency. It is the power to keep an inner line of truth, even when facing outside pressure. It is when you feel something wrong in a situation, and even without being able to explain logically, you trust your feelings. You do not need to show proof or build complex cases. You simply say, "This does not feel right to me," and that is enough. This stance, which seems simple, is radical in a world where most live cut off from themselves, where choices are made based on what others think, where feelings are overlooked for fear of seeming too emotional, and where lines are crossed with fake smiles, so as not to seem hard. Integrity is the opposite of that. It is the skill of being complete, of not breaking apart to please, of not concealing to avoid clash. Jung knew that true change does not happen when you learn more ideas, but when you live a new attitude toward life. And this attitude begins with the refusal to justify, because every compulsive reason carries a hidden uncertainty. Am I enough? The whole person no longer asks this. They know they are, even when the world keeps saying no. And here lies the puzzle. The less you look for approval, the more respect you call for. Because integrity has weight, it has substance, it has being. That is why without saying a word, a centered person can change the feel of a place. They do not need to show anything. Their inner consistency already says it all. People like this do not ask for room. They take it. They do not act from uncertainty. They act from alignment. But there is a key point. This integrity is only possible when you stop betraying yourself, when you stop shaping yourself to be accepted, when you allow yourself to feel, choose, act, even if no one gets it. This requires practice. It requires attention. It requires self-awareness. But above all, it requires the courage to take charge of your own life, without blaming others, without lending out your value. And when this integrity settles, the results are deep. Relationships shift. The way you place yourself in work shifts. Your self-view gets clear. Worry goes down. the need to manage what others think vanishes, because you stop living to be understood and start living to be true. But there is something even deeper, something that happens not only in how you connect to the world, but in what you start to give off. When you stop justifying yourself, you start to give off a new energy, that of someone who is in charge of themselves. And this energy is felt without words by everyone near it. This is where the unseen change happens. The world begins to treat you as someone who does not bargain. In the next and last part, we will see how this mental integrity changes your relationship with the outside world. How without saying a word, you come to be respected in ways that once seemed out of reach. And why, when you stop explaining yourself, the whole world changes how it answers to your presence. When a person stops explaining themselves, everything changes, not just inside but around them. It's as if a new signal starts to be sent. You no longer say, "Please understand me." You give off, "I know who I am, and I don't need your permission." And the world cannot help but answer. Jung knew that the human mind is led by energy, by presence, by inner makeup, and not by logical reasons. The person who always tries to be understood sends out a vibration of yielding, of doubt. The one who no longer explains themselves sends out strength, clearness, authority. And this is not about becoming proud. It's about finally becoming complete. People start to hear you differently. Unbalanced relationships stop making sense. Patterns where you were passive, predictable, easily led, simply fall apart. Not because you fought, but because you are no longer willing to play the same part. Quiet changes the setup of your relationships, because it says what you once begged for. It says, "I am not here to be changed, I am here to be." And from there you begin to pull a different kind of link, deeper, more honest, more in line with who you have become. Respect starts from the inside out. And the first step is exactly to stop justifying your own life. But this trip needs attention, because in times of doubt, the urge to explain yourself will come back. It will seem safer to please. It will seem simpler to give in. And it is in those moments that you must recall, every time you quiet an explanation, you confirm, you strengthen your integrity. You take your place in the world, not as someone who begs for room, but as someone who already knows they belong. So now, tell me in the comments, what is the explanation you repeat the most, and that, deep down, you already know you don't want to give anymore? Maybe it's about your feelings, your limits, your way of being. Write it down. This is more than just letting out steam, it's a turning point. And if this message challenged or moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, share it with those who explain themselves too much, and join the channel. The next video is also key on this journey. Watch it now. You will see why.